Okay, welcome to today's Fireside Chat hosted by the Boeing Company, Greenwood Rising in Oklahoma City Public Schools. My name is Simone Burrough, and I'm a junior here at Douglas High School. I will be moderating our conversation. February is Black History Month, and we had a unique opportunity to explore the newly launched Greenwood Rising Virtual Reality experience this week. We hope the virtual tour, accompanying the VR experience, helped learn about the significance of the Black Walk Street and the community resilience to rebuild even 100 years following the Tulsa Race Massacre. Joining me today is Dr. Raymond Doswell, Executive Director of the Greenwood Rising Museum, and Ms. Brenda Alford, descendant of the Tulsa Race Massacre, who was deeply involved in efforts like the Mass Grave Excavation Project. I'll start by asking project questions of our guests, and then you'll have the chance to ask them questions as well. Be sure to write them down with your first name only, grade, and school, and give them to your teacher so they can put them in the box. This broadcast will also be recorded so you can go back and listen for anything you want to reflect on further. Let's get started. Dr. Doswell, we will start with you. Tell us first a little about yourself, and then what's your professional background, and why did you choose this field of study?
Well, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you this morning. I am a high school history teacher by training. I grew up in the St. Louis area, specifically East St. Louis, Illinois, which unfortunately also experienced similar tragedy as Tulsa, but this time in 1917. But learning about that history gives me a good deal of background on what was experienced here in Tulsa. It was in a primarily African-American community, but went to college, learned to be a teacher primarily. So I'm a historian by training, but a public historian. So public historians work in places like archives and museums, as opposed to maybe some of your social studies teachers. But I did teach social studies for a little while in the St. Louis area before learning about public history as well. Got an opportunity to do internships in places like Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian and work in California as well. And for many years, I worked in Kansas City at a place called the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum before coming here to Tulsa to work at Greenwood Rising just last year. So I've only been in Oklahoma for a little while. But learning this wonderful and important history and meeting great people like Ms. Alford that have been teaching me about the legacy of Black history here in the Midwest. So at heart, I'm a school teacher, but very excited to be able to talk about history and enlighten a lot of people about our racial past.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you so much. That was very inspirational. Dr. Doswell, now tell us about the Greenwood Rising Museum and why was it started and why is it like important today?
So beginning in around 2015, 2016, there was a group that came together called the Tulsa Race Riot Centennial Commission, or Race Massacre Centennial Commission, excuse me. This is a group of leaders, local leaders, who wanted to anticipate the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre and was trying to think about, well, what are we going to do to mark that important occasion? And so in addition to some other things that are happening here in this neighborhood of Greenwood, which you'll learn about, where African-American history was here in Tulsa, in terms of opportunities for redevelopment and building some things. They traveled across the country to different civil rights locations in Alabama and other places, investigated monuments and museums and memorials, and they came back with the idea of building a history center, which would become Greenwood Rising. This is an 11,000 square foot immersive exhibit, and probably some of your classmates, especially the ninth graders, have probably been here if they've been part of one of our special programs, which is sponsored by another sponsor. But you probably had a chance to visit the space, and the facility covers the entire history of Greenwood with an overview, with the emphasis on the Tulsa Race Massacre, but mostly to understand the history of the African American community here, how it was founded, the creation of what has been known as Black Wall Street, and some of the important entrepreneurs who were a part of that. And then, of course, how they were able to rebuild after the massacre. So you come and takes usually about an hour to go through if you're traveling on your own. Then, of course, if you're here with your teachers or classmates, we have docent educators who help lead you through and get you to think about some of the critical thinking questions that are related to understanding racial history in America.
Okay, thank you. That was very insightful. So, Miss Alford, we're going to welcome you to the Fireside Chat. Can you tell
Thank
us
you.
more about you and your family's connection to the Greenwood history? And then how did you learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, and thanks for having me here today, and definitely for your interest in the history of Black Wall Street and Greenwood community. My grandparents were survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre and Black Wall Street entrepreneurs, and they, along with my great uncle, were the proud owners of the Nails Brothers Shoe Shop and Record Shop that was located at 121 North Greenwood Avenue and various locations throughout the community. They were also the first owners of what is now Lacey Park, wherein the Nails Dance Pavilion and skating rink was located. They also operated a limousine and taxi service. So just like the community was at that time, they were very entrepreneurial spirited. In 2003, my life would change forever when I would receive notification that myself and many others in the community were being included in a lawsuit about the reparations surrounding the 1921 race riot, as it was called at that time. And it's very important to keep that term in our history because it would have such a huge effect on how our community was treated after the race massacre. However, it became just so important to me to begin the research of our family history because finding out about our involvement with the Tulsa Race Massacre in this manner was absolutely devastating to me. I grew up in a community that was so loving, so kind. My family was just so positive. The call of the community was you get your education to be your best, do your best. And then to find out so many years later that something as tragic as the Tulsa Race Massacre had occurred was absolutely heartbreaking. But I have so much respect for my family and my community members because they gave us such positivity in spite of everything that they endured.
Right. That was amazing. Amazing. It's interesting to see how many people learned later in life, not the story of Greenwood, but their family's connection to it. Miss Alfred, when I introduced you earlier, I mentioned the Mass Graves Project. Can you tell us more about that and like why is the project happening?
It is so important because this was is a process that should have happened many, many years ago.
Right, definitely.
Right after the race massacre actually, but it did not. There was so much intentionality of hiding the story of the race massacre, and there was quite a lot of intentionality of hiding the evidence or the bodies of the victims of the race massacre as well. And so they did not get the due respect that they deserved. Their families did not get to honor their memories or to bury them in the way that they would have wanted to do. So we want to, if it is possible, to give that respect to them. So in 1997, the Race Riot Commission was formed. And one of the suggestions that they would give in their report in 2001 would be to uh, memorialize those victims that were killed. And if we do find mass graves and we do find victims associated with the Tulsa Race Massacre, to give them that respect that they so deserve.
Right. Right. That's amazing because everybody deserves respect, especially what has happened. Okay, so this question is for both of you. What did you find the most interesting artifact or part of the museum and why?
Well, I'll start. When I saw that question, I just was like, oh my gosh. I can't say that there's one thing that I enjoy about the museum. I am so grateful that the museum exists and for the hard work that Dr. Doswell and others do to tell the history of Greenwood and Black Wall Street. But it is just an amazing museum. And, when you walk through it, it just brings such pride and joy to me. So all of it is so very important. And I tell you, if I ever find, just one thing, I'll be very surprised.
I think I share your sentiment. Now, for me, coming in just in this last year, there's so many unique things that we've done, which I can't take credit for. So I want to give credit to those who had the foresight to organize the History Center in the way that they did, to allow for people to really engage the space. And now you all are getting a rare first opportunity to see the virtual reality experience of somewhat walking through the History Center, and getting to see the different displays. It'll never replace, though, being here in person. But at least hopefully will get you intrigued by what we have here and wanting to come and visit as soon as you can. But I will say that visitors who come, there are a couple of areas that are interesting. Our barbershop area is one that many visitors gravitate to because it's whimsical and that it's fun to hear the barbers banter with each other. And for those of us who go to the barbershop, that still happens today, of course.
Right.
But I think what's also important just to understand more subtly is the barbers are of three different generations, even in that time period, younger, middle age, and older. And you see kind of the differences of opinions in terms of how they see the world, even in those times. And yet some of those differences really intersect with each other as well. As you move along in understanding social studies and history, you'll learn about people like Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, who at the time of the 1920s, their different philosophies about Black liberation kind of intersect with everyone. And across the country, people were kind of debating these different styles. And that was no different here in Tulsa at the time. So that's kind of, the barbers are kind of reflecting some of those philosophies when they're speaking. So it's a fun way of teaching you all history, so we sneak in some lessons while you're having a little fun.
Right.
And so that's probably something that I think our visitors really gravitate to when they get a chance to visit and are surprised by just the general way that the technology works in that space as well, to give you also the illusion of getting a haircut when you're there with the barber.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, Dr. Doswell, I have another question for you. The story of Greenwood doesn't stop at the massacre. Can you talk about the ending of the museum and why it matters to take time to reflect and process, please?
An excellent question. So it is true that uh, the events of the race massacre were devastating for the community. So much loss, both loss of life, loss of property, but the resiliency of the people pushed them to want to rebuild. And even despite some obstacles put before them by city officials and others, they were able to start rebuilding relatively quickly. If you come to Greenwood, there's a building across the street from the History Center, one of the older buildings that was built after the massacre. And there's a capstone on top of the building, and it has a date, and that date is 1922. So it would have been just a few months after the events of the massacre. So they started rebuilding very quickly, and they started rebuilding businesses very quickly. And the end of the exhibition, which we call Changing Fortunes, focuses on that history from that point through to the civil rights movement, as well as through to more modern times. And so you get to see these businesses rebuilt. We have artifacts from some of those businesses, churches and schools that you can see as well. There's even a little bit of film footage of some of the people rebuilding and things like that we're fortunate to have here at the History Center. But what is also important to me, but also what I've learned in my short time here at the History Center and what Ms. Alford alluded to earlier is that it is kind of in this time period as these things were happening. And as you move further away from the events of 1921, that the events of 1921 were either being buried or willfully forgotten or difficult to talk about for certain groups. And so as you move further and further away, um, uh, descendants, as well as others, or even family members of perpetrators, didn't know what happened. And so all these things are happening, and only until more recent years was, understanding of what happened was uncovered. You would be, well, you might not be surprised, but I can tell you that I was initially about how many people that would come into the History Center, roughly about my age, and I'm in my middle 50s, and they would say, Dr. Doswell, we did not learn this in school. Oh, we did not learn this from our parents and grandparents. And maybe we heard of Greenwood, but we didn't know about what happened. And I would not expect them to know the real nitty gritty details of what happened, but they didn't learn about it at all. They went to schools in Oklahoma, they went to colleges in Oklahoma, and they never learned it. And only until more recent years, and then especially when we had the 2021 centennial, did they even have a real understanding of the scope of what happened here. And so that's been kind of laying over not only this community, but really many residents of the state. And so that ending exhibition really kind of brings some of that out and some of the other issues that are related to that. So you'll see photos of even this sit-in movement that happened in Oklahoma City that was kind of important to folks here in Tulsa. You get to see pictures of important people who are striving here in Tulsa and Native Sons like the Gap Band, but also the importance of the building. If you've come to Tulsa, you understand that Interstate 244 was built and kind of split Greenwood in half, which created another blow for economics here through urban renewal. And so that's an important part of the story as well. So you learn all of that and make those connections to more modern times.
Okay, thank you so much. Those reminders are very true. I just have two more questions and then we'll get to the audience questions from students. So, Dr. Doswell, again, through Boeing support, Greenwood Rising is demonstrating how technology can carry forth important stories of our nation's history and drive conversations that help reconciliate and move us to progress. Can you talk about why this is important to Greenwood Rising and what you hope for others to do with this resource, please?
Well, we're very excited for the partnership with Boeing, especially. It allows us to begin allowing conversations about race and racial reconciliation through our lessons to as many people as possible. Our VR website is meant for accessibility. And when I say accessibility, I mean for as many students as well as general patrons to access it as much as possible. And there are even ways to kind of scale it up and make it even more technologically savvy, but sometimes less is more in this case. So it's set up right now so that if you have a phone or a tablet or a computer, anyone can use it and get to see the images of the History Center. And it's still a bit of a work in progress, but we're adding and tweaking and adding things to it as well as we move forward. And the goal is that you go through, you get to see the History Center, you get to learn about specific topics as you go through, and we connect those to other websites, reputable websites like the Oklahoma Historical Society, for example, with even deeper information on certain topics as you go through. So our History Center gets you started with a compelling story, understanding the roots of Greenwood, how it was built, how it moves forward, and of course, the Race Massacre. And then there are opportunities for you to learn and go deeper and deeper. So it's a good way to start understanding this history if you want to move forward. And the support of Boeing helps us, again, to get that out on the web to as many potential students and patrons as possible. It's a great partnership. And Boeing understands it's important to have people be able to learn the history, learn the truth about the history, so that we can move forward from standard facts and be able to have important dialogue about how that affects us today. And so we're very grateful for that, and grateful for Oklahoma City Public Schools to test this out and help us make improvements to the site as well.
Right, that's amazing, wonderful. And I know you mentioned about how like the kinks of what's going on, but you are doing a wonderful job because I know it's not everybody's a lot of people are not familiar with what is going on and what has happened, and you all are putting like the work in to getting kids, specifically my age, kids knowing of our history, Oklahoma history. That is amazing. So, for the families, teachers, and students community that are tuning in, we hope that you will share the virtual reality platform and use it for the reflection and discovering your part in charting better futures. So, my last question is for Miss Alford. Before we ask your questions, we know that knowledge is power. I apologize. As a descendant of the Tulsa Race Massacre and resident of Tulsa, what do you hope that students take away from this experience? And what advice would you have for them carrying out the story of Greenwood?
I hope that the takeaway from this is that it empowers students and just lets you know that you need to know your history. I
Right.
hope that it makes you want to go out there and find your history and to know your history, because it's so important to know who you are and where you come from. And many of you probably still have family members who are here, still living in this day and time that you can talk to, and they can share the history of your families and your communities with you. That is just so, so empowering. I can say that as I've gone through and done my research, after finding out about our history with the race massacre, I was surprised to realize that I, in fact, did hear about the race massacre. I just didn't know it. As a little girl, I heard stories like I always knew my grandmother had to hide in a church for some reason. And when our family would pass by Oaklawn Cemetery, the older people in the car would look over there and always say, they're still over there. I didn't know what that meant. And I had to think about that cemetery for a long time. And then over the years, you didn't hear anything else. And then so many years later, to hear about what happened in our community and our family's involvement was absolutely, I tell you, it was heartbreaking, but at the same time, it's wonderful because I know. And it's so important for you to know your history. If it's possible to love and respect a family any more than I already did, it's through the moon. I am so proud of their strength, courage, and tenacity through all that they endured during one of the worst atrocities, not only in Tulsa, but U.S. history. And, it just kind of goes with the teachings, that we go with and that our families teach us that, when you face adversities in your own lives, to never give up,
Right.
to keep the faith and keep moving forward. And, one last thing is that studying the history, knowing the history of my family, it just lets me know that, and I would not have known otherwise, is that if my grandparents had not survived those terrible days and hours, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you right now. And I'm grateful.
That is very powerful. Very, very powerful. So I don't know about anybody else that's watching, but I'm very inspired. And I've only been here for about 30 to 40 minutes. So you all have inspired me very much because you need to know your history. So let's get to the students' questions. For the last 18 to 20 minutes, students will read the questions from the chat given. So Dr. Doswell and Miss Alford, you all can decide which questions you both can answer.
So we don't have any. Can you ask the people watching to submit their questions?
Okay, so please, everybody watching, can you please submit your questions in at this moment?
While we're waiting, um, I want to just add a few things. As I said, we're fortunate from the standpoint of visiting the History Center to have young people here in Tulsa and Oklahoma City to come up and visit the History Center. We have about here in the Tulsa Public Schools, mostly all the eighth graders come to visit. And that's over 2,000 students a year here at the History Center. I always like to make the point too that another important group that visits the History Center is the city of Tulsa's Police Department Academy recruits. And for you high school, as you get to high school seniors, generally speaking, those young people are just out of college or in the military. And the Tulsa Police Department recognizes that as you dig deeper in the history of the race massacre, that the police did not have a good role in that event. So they want the new recruits to understand what not to do, most importantly, and to make that connection to the community, how important it is to make connections to the community moving forward. So the students and the police in particular are going to be future leaders, we hope, here in Tulsa in particular, but maybe even across the state. So, and whereas initially people like Miss Alford didn't know that history growing up, these new generations and you all will know it now. And so you can be informed by the civil rights history that has happened in your state. And if you become future leaders, you will understand how things like the race massacre or even the sit-in movement in Oklahoma City and other things affect the community. And so when you become leaders, you're informed by that history, how that affects you now. For example, here in Tulsa, I mean, you know, parts of the community don't trust the police. So that has a history. It goes back to then. But the police recognize that and they know they have work to do. And so we're very proud of those two relationships in particular. And we want to keep encouraging young people to, just as Ms. Alford said, to know your history, seek it out, and be informed. And I think we hopefully are doing our best good in that light.
And if I may say, and yes, the Greenwood Rising Center and other facilities that have also taken on, you know, this challenge are doing a great job. I just have to say that I'm just so proud of the work that we do at Greenwood Rising and having students to come in and, you know, research the history because uh, as I've said, this is something that I didn't know, anything or hardly anything about as I was growing up, except for the little conversations I heard as a little girl. And for you all to have the opportunity to learn these stories and know these stories and have the conversations that, you know, generate, you know, inclusivity amongst the communities, okay, is very, very important because it brings back that old saying, and I'm old fashioned and all this, but I used to hear as I grew up as a little girl, when we know better, we hopefully what? Do better.
Right. Okay, so I have another question. Can you all talk about the significant figures who came to Oklahoma and regarded Black Wall Street across the nation? For example, like Booker T. Washington or W.E.B. Du Bois. Sorry. And then can you talk about the significance of E.P. McCabe, please?
So if you're using the VR site, I believe one of the points of interest is information about Mr. McCabe in particular. And I won't give too much away because we want you to search and look for it, but he is an important figure from the Midwest, a politician who helped encourage a number of African Americans to come to this area, to migrate here. In your social studies classes, you probably already talked about, if you haven't, you might talk about a period in African American history called the Great Migration. This is after slavery, where African Americans were leaving the South and going to other places around the country looking for a better life. And most of that was in the cities, like, say, St. Louis or Chicago or New York City. But people like Mr. McCabe was encouraging people to come to what is now known as Indian Territory. And we're talking around the 1880s, 1890s. And the goal was, instead of going to the crowded cities, come here to more open land where you could maybe have a farm and have a little bit more space and room to work. And those efforts were very successful to the point that, as some of you may know, there were several towns founded by Black people here in this region. Close to 50 of those towns. And if you go to the points of interest on the VR site, you'll see, I believe one of those points is the All Black Town movement. So you can read up on that, and there are resources from the Oklahoma Historical Society about what that is. And so Mr. McCabe's and his colleagues' efforts were important to that. And also, if we move forward, what that means is that there was a growing significant African American population here in this region going back many years, and maybe people are surprised to know that. Along, of course, with the connections to a Native population that was here, and those connections were intertwined. But ultimately, with the discovery of oil, especially here in the Tulsa region, many of those folk and others were able to take advantage through businesses and other things to benefit from the growing population here coming to seek their fortunes or seek a better life, but partly because of oil and other things. And those were some of the business people that developed what would be known as Black Wall Street. But the wealth that was concentrated here in terms of Black-owned businesses led people like the great educator Booker T. Washington and civil rights leader to say, or it's attributed to him saying that this area of Tulsa was akin to a Negro Wall Street, and term back then. Now, when you think of Wall Street in New York, it's the financial center, stocks, market, trade things, but it's associated with wealth. And our historian Hannibal Johnson said, well, this area of Tulsa was more like a Main Street, not a Wall Street. But the point is taken that it was a wealthy area. And that's why Washington said that. And then, of course, the name Negro transfers more later on into Black. And so the area is more affectionately known as Black Wall Street. So, but Booker T. Washington is credited as kind of naming this area, giving it its nickname, if you.
Okay, thank you for that. This question is for both of you. Researching the Tulsa Race Massacre, what is the most surprising piece of information that you all found? Or interesting piece of information?
Well, for me, I just did not realize, as Dr. Doswell just mentioned, some of the history regarding the freedmen and, certain aspects of how and why people came to Oklahoma. Doing my research, as I have suggested, I know that my grandparents migrated from Mississippi, from the South, to Texas, and shortly before statehood would arrive in Oklahoma by covered wagon. So they were looking for a better way of life. And, they had it for a bit, and I'm so very happy that they and our community members, were able to have that opportunity. So again, this is why it is so, so important for you to study and research and know your history, so that you can understand why or how situations occur, and what brings us to this present date and time.
I would add, just specifically, as you mentioned on the Tulsa Race Massacre, a surprising thing. I guess it wouldn't be surprising, but it's more of a revelation. And I guess as you all move on and study in social studies, there's to understand that things don't just happen out of the blue, in our history or in society. Things kind of build up over time. And this is kind of something to remember. And maybe that's difficult sometimes when you guys are learning in class, because you're not able to talk about every little detail of history, like day to day, exactly what led up to certain things. But there was a lot that kind of led up to what happened. And then in our country, there's just a lot of cause and effect. So I think for me, just understanding that the unfortunate events of Tulsa are kind of near the end of many other unfortunate events that are happening around the country. There's kind of racial violence that's happening across the country going back many, many years, but especially in this time period in and around World War One. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that African Americans, in part, not solely, but in part, African Americans, especially after World War One, fighting for freedom in Europe, but not getting certain rights at home, are looking for freedom. And the tensions are building up where people are kind of pitting other groups against Black and white. And so you have a number of different racial incidents that happen across the country. I mentioned earlier East St. Louis, 1917. It was Houston, Texas, 1917. 1919, you all may have, in social studies, may have talked about a time period called the Red Summer, which included a lot of race riots across the country, Chicago in particular, and then Tulsa. And so unfortunately, there were lessons that weren't learned. And we ended up having Tulsa. And then, of course, there were things that happened after Tulsa. You may have heard of Rosewood, Florida, which was another incident. And so just the building and the building and the building of those things across the country kind of lead to, in part, to what's happening in Tulsa. And there's a lot of other factors, but just important to understand that things don't just explode and happen for out of the blue. There's just lots of things that build up in our history and there are consequences to that. And you're living through a lot of history now where you see different things around the world and domestically, but they're not happening out of the blue. So then when you come into the History Center, hopefully we're educating you on kind of how these things unfortunately build up, but there's a cause and effect to everything.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we're going to end the live, not the live, end the meeting. Thank you, Dr. Raymond Doswell and Ms. Brenda Alford, Oklahoma City Public Schools, and the Bowen Company for today's fireside chat. For more information about Greenwood Rising or to visit the virtual reality site for yourself, please visit www.greenwoodrising.org. Thank you all for your time. It was very, very impactful and powerful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.